In 1 month, she was able to she took them very religiously several times a day. She was able to get up and walk. In 4 months, she was able to drive a car. And in 1 year, after having stage 4 cancer, she was declared cancer free.
We wake up and we're like, my body is starting to break down out of nowhere. Like I've heard so many people say that. They're like, I was fine until I hit 42, or I was fine until I hit 43. And then everything just went downhill after that.
We deteriorate because we have atoms in our body that make up our cells that lose an electron. You will discover that to stop things from rotting, you need an electron. But if we continue to do things that produce free radicals, which is that electron, is from a good atom in our body, the atom's lost an electron, that will accumulate, and then the cells will start to deteriorate, and our body will start to age, which we know as aging. We can't run as fast, we don't think as good, we start having feelings that are not normal, and anxiety and depression sets in. And that is all it is. It's molecular science. It's not hard to understand. But if you start out with eating good nutrition and you see that you're beginning to age, if you feed the body right now with supplements that have a lot of electrons, you will stop this and you will live many years beyond. The farmers started coming in and saying, I don't know what you do, but that fertilizer is really good. I get 20 bushel more corn. I want you to know that you can do this in your garden at home, and it's not going to cost a lot of extra money for some patent. Everybody should know the soil is the basis for our bodies, the nutrition. And that's why I think, like old Earl Butz used to say, sometimes we chase the wrong rabbit.
Do you think it's not really the Mediterranean diet that's so healthy, but rather the fact that they grew it in volcanic soil?
That's my understanding of what I have read.
And so what you're saying is, look, the ground already has electrons, but let's amplify those electrons because we need it today. We have so much insult to us with radiation, 5G, EMF frequencies, and the food we eat, and the air we breathe, the water we drink, that it's depleting the electrons and creating free radicals in our body. So you're saying we can put that on the fruits and vegetables that we grow, and we can increase the electrons that our body uptakes when we eat them.
The elegance of this new mechanism GlaxoSmithKline found is that it reduces chronic diseases and stimulates our body to grow healthier. That information really struck me wild. Gee whiz, us farmers can grow healthier food, and I can teach gardeners how to grow better quality produce.
I'm so excited to share today about an acquaintance of mine who stumbled upon an incredible discovery while just trudging along in his fertilizer business. He had no idea the implications of the kind of fertilizer that he was creating and how it could massively affect our health and the production of crops for his farmers, and just some incredible stuff that he found. And he approached me really wanting to get this message out to the world. He's retired now, so he's not interested so much in selling his fertilizer as getting this information out to benefit people. And what we're going to talk about today is not complicated stuff. It is simple. It's a simple take home thing, a gift that I want to leave with you guys of how you can very powerfully increase your nutrition and your health through something you can do with your gardens. Now, I've known Jim Diss through my husband for many years, mostly as an acquaintance. He lives in Vegas, so we hardly ever interacted. So I'm just kind of like painting the picture of how, divinely this was all arranged and set up. However, during the times when we would get together, I remember feeling like I didn't understand why Jim was so passionate about electrons. He was in real estate and he sold fertilizer. So to me, I kept trying to understand the link in his mind between his fertilizer, the farmers, the crops, and electrons. To me, electrons were science, but he was talking about them as if they were, related to health. So I think back in those days he was still discovering how all of this tied together, but in latter years, he really has made a lot of connections with this fertilizer that he sort of happened upon, this fertilizer that he created, and the benefits that he was seeing on the crops for farmers. Fast forward several years to a phone call I received a few weeks ago. It was Jim. And the first thing he said was, "Do you know what antioxidants are?" So I'm a little bit of a health geek, and I replied, "Well, yes, I think so. They stop us from aging, right? They're our fountain of youth. They protect us from harm." He said, "Yes, but I don't think most people really understand what they are and how critical they are to our health. I stumbled upon something that I want to get out to the masses. I'm in town now. Can we meet?" So my husband had urged Jim to reach out to me, and I to him. I tentatively agreed. Little did I know that what he was about to share with me was so much more aligned than I expected with what I had been discovering myself. As I said, it was as if he was the next puzzle piece, the next divinely planned encounter on this journey to health, happiness, and success. Now, Jim has been in the business of plant health and growth for most of his life. However, he had no idea that what he discovered while creating fertilizers for plants could also help humans get well. Oftentimes, I think the greatest discoveries happen accidentally, and it's as if God jumps in to say, "Hey, look at this, it's important." In similar fashion, Jim stumbled upon this discovery. As he was creating fertilizer, farmers began to ask him, "What in the world are you doing differently?" Their corn crops were flourishing, their yields were increasing exponentially. Jim didn't know what was actually happening and wouldn't know until years later. Now, as a side note, Jim is just a retired farmer and fertilizer producer, not a health professional. So he is explaining what he has researched as best he can.
The thing that's interesting, and I relate it to the fact that in the 80s I discovered this, but it wasn't until the 2022 and I read that book that electrons are not only significantly important for plants, but they're vitally important for our own health. And it was the book We Are Electric that taught me that these electrons also help with the biology of our own bodies.
Hmm.
And so that's, to me, that's why it has not been discovered before. People have used clay for 50, well, we started using clays back in the 1950s after the Second World War. And in 1960s, I used it to make fertilizer. But it wasn't until I put my own plant together in the 80s that farmers begin to notice an increase in yields.
Hmm.
And so that's when I first saw there was a relationship to the clay and corn yields. But I didn't understand it. And it wasn't until the pandemic that I started reading about why the clay, which has electrons, was stimulating a plant to grow more vigorous, taller, and yield 10 to 20% more grain. And so I understood that that was caused by the electrons stimulating chlorophyll, which converts sunshine into matter.
Mm.
It converts that more effectively and grows a larger plant.
Hmm.
So that's the first time I noticed something going on.
Hmm.
And then in 2022, the book We Are Electric came out. I read that. It starts clear back with Ben Franklin and just studying lightning coming out of clouds.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes up to the current time when I got to page 246, that the elegance of this new mechanism GlaxoSmithKline found is that it reduces chronic diseases and stimulates our body to grow healthier.
Mm.
And then I've read that book several times now, and that information really struck me wild. Gee whiz, us farmers can grow healthier food, and I can teach gardeners how to grow better quality produce. And that's what really triggered my the progression of getting more interested in this and saying, this is not patentable. It's a common clay soil they dig out of the Okefenokee swamps, and everybody's got it. We've been using it for years in fertilizer. But I stumbled onto it through my manufacturing of fertilizer in my plant at Roanoke, Indiana. And the farmers started coming in and saying, I don't know what you do, but that fertilizer is really good. I get 20 bushel more corn.
Mm.
And that's when I first realized there was something going on, but I didn't understand it until the pandemic came and I couldn't go anyplace in Vegas. I had to sit home and watch that TV, which I got bored with. I was so bored that I read these documents on biology about plant growth, and that's really being bored. And so that's when I discovered that clay electrons have something to do with biology. And that biology led me to read more about plant growth. And then when the book came out in 2022, I found that GlaxoSmithKline and other scientists also were relating that electrons help people, the biology of our bodies. And it really stimulated my thought of trying to bring that information to farmers and the public. First half, I started out with Dad and I farming. And unfortunately, he died when I was in high school, so I took over the farm. I was fortunate enough to go to Purdue and took courses in agriculture. And I, like a lot of people, heard John Kennedy say, do what you can for your country. So I joined the Air Force, got out in 66, and then went to work for a chemical company called Allied Chemical selling fertilizer. And I set up a lot of dealers to manufacture fertilizer using Allied chemicals. Then in the 70s, late 70s, I put my own plant together at Roanoke and I produced fertilizer. During the 1980s, the government had decreed that big smokestack companies had to get the sulfur out of their smokestacks. And the way they did that was to blow in ammonia that combined with the sulfur fell to the bottom of the stack, and they would put it on a truck. You could buy it for a ridiculously low price. And so I was using it. I knew enough about manufacturing fertilizer that I discovered that nitrogen was cheaper than straight nitrogen I could buy in the market, and the sulfur came along free. Well, then in the 80s is when the farmers started telling me, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm getting better yield. It didn't occur to me that it was the sulfur, except I did some fertilizing on strawberries in February, and I killed them all. And the insurance company cost them about 75,000. And so I discovered there was some problem with that sulfur. And I made sure I only put it on bare ground before any crop was planted. And then the farmer would see the results. Amongst my farmers was a friend of mine who he and I had been in 4-H together, and he was farming 4,000 acres. And he always tried to be good to all of us, and he would buy from 2 or 3 different dealers. And in my area, when he farmed that farms, he would have a competitor of mine do half the field, and I would do the other half. And a couple of years after that happened, he commented to me, I don't know what you did to that fertilizer, but I always got 20 to 25 bushel more corn on your side.
Hmm.
And I didn't know what I did either, except I just made liquid fertilizer. I used clay, and it didn't dawn on me why. Well, I retired, moved to Vegas in 99, and then the pandemic came along in 2020, and you couldn't go any place in Vegas. You couldn't do anything. They closed everything. The Vegas was dormant. So I started reading one day. I looked at the computer and I put in the search engine, and I knew clay had electrons in it. Let's put electrons in plants. I was surprised to find there were lots of articles about that. People had done that research and documented the information, and they wrote it up and published it. Well, I was on the other end. I was out using it, and I didn't know why. But they had documented that sulfur in the fertilizer caused the clay to release the electrons that are normally on clay soils.
So, okay, so backing up a little bit, the government or whatever had decided that they would use ammonia, that the farmers should use ammonium to get the sulfur out of the.
The government wanted the sulfur out of the smokestack
Okay,
because it was falling on lakes, causing them to become acid,
okay.
and it was hurting the fishing and swimming.
Hmm.
So their decree was the environmental impact of sulfur being liberally spread over all ground, and they decreed that had to be stopped. And the way to stop that, the companies then had a choice. Well, they just decided to put that ammonia into the stream of smoke. It would combine with sulfur, therefore becoming heavy enough that it would fall to the bottom of the smokestack, and they could dig it up and sell it. And
Hmm.
they sold it very cheap.
But what you're telling me is that I guess the sulfur had fallen on the farmer's crops
Yeah,
and
the
it was actually doing something really great for the ground?
farmers got free sulfur for years, but they
Oh,
weren't complaining about it. They just knew it came out of the smokestacks, and that was fine with them. But environmentalists were seeing lakes becoming more sour with the acid of the
oh,
sulfur,
okay.
and so the Environmental Protection Agency said, just like we had to get lead out of gasoline, we have to get sulfur out of smokestacks, and they did it. And I came along knowing how to manufacture fertilizer and seeing, gee, this was really cheap. And I could save money on my manufacturing by utilizing the ammonia. And the sulfur, like always, came along free for farmers.
Yeah. So I want to get to that a little bit more later.
Okay.
For now, I wanted to ask you, we're going to get to how you discovered something that you believe will help a lot of people restore their health. But my question to you is, why does it matter to you? Because, you called me up and you were like, hey, do you know what antioxidants are? And I was like, well, I think so. I mean, they're very anti-aging. They protect the body against harm. And you're like, but I don't think a lot of people really understand what these are. And as long as I've known you, you've been passionate about electrons. And I always
Yeah.
wondered, like, what does that have to do with fertilizer and health? And somehow in your mind, like, you knew. So I guess, why does it matter to you today what you
Well,
discovered?
my dad, farmed, my grandpa farmed there. And I remember as a kid in the single digits and the late 40s, Dad bought a new corn planter, And I walked out in the field where he was planting, and he stopped at the end and put fertilizer in. And at that moment, he emphasized me how important it was to take care of the soil. And that was going to be the way we live, to grow good crops. And I was always impressed with that. Is important to really take care of soil. That's our future. So
Mm.
that from moment on, I thought of soil. And of course, being in 4-H and activities of agriculture, growing crops was always an interesting part of my life. Then as went through Purdue and learned that clay is a soil particle that always has electrons in it. It always holds the electrons. It is originally a positive charge particle, and when lightning strikes the ground, the energy of the electrons of that lightning go into clay. So clay mostly is full of electrons in most parts of the world. And so consequently, that's how I saw my role as bringing that information to the country. There's no way of patenting this. This is free for everybody. That's what I
Mm.
want to do today. I want you to know that you can do this on your garden at home, and it's not going to cost a lot of extra money for some patent. It's just the normal price of buying clay, dirt, and ammonium sulfate. Mix them together and apply that to the ground.
Hmm. So that's kind of what you discovered along the way as you were helping farmers. So you
Yes,
you had the ammonium, and which was a very common thing
nitrogen. Yeah,
for fertilizer companies to
right.
use. So you knew you were going to start with that, and then take us to the other parts that you added along the way that helped you to increase the amount of electrons, and how did you even find that that was important in the first place?
Okay, I knew enough when I retired to Vegas and the pandemic came along and I started reading biology information. And it's not really exciting reading, but I knew enough about it. It interests me. The clay has electrons, and normally clay will not release electrons. But after reading about why my farmers kept coming to me and saying, I don't know what you do to that fertilizer, but I get more yield. It's doing great. Well, at the time, I didn't understand the chemistry or the biology. And then it wasn't until the pandemic that I started getting serious about reading biology papers on the internet. And that's what I encourage people to do. It is so easy. Now, I would have never gone to a library and looked up card files and studied them and try and find books. But on your computer, you can just put in electrons in plants or antioxidants in plants. And up comes dozens and dozens of articles. And it's not reading beyond my understanding. And that's the same with everybody else. That information is all free. It comes to us right in our homes, libraries with tremendous amount of technical knowledge that we can read and understand why an electron stimulates the biology of a plant. That's when I began to realize in the late 2018, 19, and I went to a dealer friend of mine who was still using clay, and he went out and put plots out, and his farmers got more yield also. And so, again, we didn't understand why, but it did happen. And so that's why I want to encourage people. You can look this up and read it for yourself. It is right there in your home.
So you just got curious about it one time during COVID, and you were like, I wonder what electrons, the impact that it has on plants,
Yeah.
right?
I
Well,
read, of course, about antioxidants first, and then I see that antioxidation is an electron. And so I did that. I began to see the correlation between the two and begin to realize that electrons stops oxidation. That's why it's called antioxidants. It's electrons stop oxidation.
Is that how you found out about electrons? Because, I know about antioxidants and free radicals and things like that, but I've never heard of it in the terms of electrons.
Correct.
So how did
That's
you?
been my concern. The word antioxidants doesn't tell you exactly what is antioxidation. And after you spend some significant time reading, you will discover that to stop things from rotting, you need an electron.
Hmm.
It's the energy out of the electrons that stops a plant, and whether it be steel, rust, or the organic material rotting, to stop that, you need an electron. The energy out of the electrons stops oxidation.
The first time I heard anything about antioxidants or really understood what they were was growing up when I was a teenager. My family had us all go to this holistic doctor named Dr. Lee. He was a Vietnamese doctor practicing in Virginia, and he learned a lot of what he learned by being in prison camps and just studying and studying and then treating people in the prison camps. And so, anyway, he looked at my blood under a microscope and he was explaining to me that there was, I believe it was his blood, my blood he was looking at, but he was basically saying there's oxidation in my blood and I need antioxidants. So, what he did was what he sent me home with, his medicine, if you will, was to take a handful of blueberries and blend them in a blender every morning and drink it. Now, I didn't know then, but I know now blueberries are packed with antioxidants. So, this was my first hearing about what antioxidants were and what they do. And he was explaining to me that oxidation in my cell, it's not a good thing. It's not it can sort of it's I guess it was related in some way to cancers and how they form, and so you'll understand a little bit more as we go just about the connections made between antioxidants and healing from a lot of the big issues that society is facing, Western society is facing today as a result of introducing processed foods and things like white flour and white sugar. That's really where a lot of our problems, like our big things that we have today, like heart disease, diabetes, cancer, that's when they got really amplified, is when these things, like white flour and sugar and processed foods, things that kept food on the shelf longer, when those were introduced, then you saw a big increase in these major diseases that are almost like normal today in Western society. But anyway, I digress. Back to the point. So, explain to us a little bit about oxidation and what it does to the human body.
Okay, there's several doctors that point that out, that we deteriorate because we have atoms in our body that make up our cells that lose an electron. And when you lose an electron, that is normal. Food you eat causes that. Maybe it's got some herbicide in it. Uh, it also, if you smoke or you breathe smoke, that sucks up electrons off of your atoms. And when it takes electrons from an atom in your body, it's called a free radical. Now, if those atoms, which are used to make cells, are defective, they will make a defective cell. And over a period of years, if you keep pumping smoke or alcohol or some of the foods that are not pure, good, clean foods into your body, you will continue to lose electrons from atoms, which are the fundamental of making a cell, and therefore the cell will be degraded and not good quality, and your life will deteriorate.
Yeah, free radicals. I think I looked up what free radicals were. It's Says it's an unstable molecule with an unpaired electron that makes them highly reactive and prone to stealing molecules from other molecules, or stealing electrons from other molecules. And that stealing process is called oxidation. That
Bingo. Bingo.
when you and I were talking about it, I was thinking, like, are these all the same thing? You know, the electron or the free radicals and the oxidation, and then also on the flip side, the antioxidants and the electrons, are they kind of doing the same thing? So I guess I just saw that, the free radicals, I know from just, hearing it. I don't know a lot about health, but I know some, and from just what I've heard from people talking about it, it's the free radicals, they kind of break down the body and they cause aging and disease and a lot of instability. And so it's trying to take the, I guess, electrons from another molecule, and so that causes like an oxidation, because then other molecules are getting broken down
Yeah.
from the one,
Right.
right?
We're moving into what's called molecular science, but it's not hard to understand. If you were building a block wall or a brick wall, if you had bad mortar, that wall wouldn't stand long. And that's what's going on with our cells. If we are building cells with atoms that have lost electrons, they're defective, the cell becomes
Mm.
defective, and then we start having chronic problems with knee pain, and we start having things that cause cancer because of the defective atoms. So it is the atom itself that has lost an electron from smoking, drinking, eating foods that aren't really healthy for us, that starts this chain. But it takes 50 to 75 years before this rears its ugly head.
Mm.
While we're youthful, we've got lots of ability to withstand the loss of that. But if we do a lot of smoking, we reduce that immensely.
So it's like, one day we wake up and we're like, my body is starting to break down out of nowhere. Like, I've heard so many people say that. They're like, I was fine until I hit 42, or I was fine until I hit 43. And then everything just went downhill after that. It's almost as if maybe what's going on is there's just like an accumulation of the free radicals and the oxidation in the body. Maybe that's a big part of it. And it's just breaking down
That's right.
things.
You have finally hit the nail on the head. This is a long process, and it takes years for it to rear its ugly head, like you say. But if we continue to do things that produce free radicals, which is that electron is from a good atom in our body, the atom's lost an electron, that will accumulate, and then the cells will start to deteriorate, and our body will start to age, which we know as aging, and we can't run as
Mm.
fast, we don't think as good, we start having feelings that are not normal, and anxiety and depression sets in, and that is all it is. It's molecular science. It's not hard to understand, and you can read it all available to you.
So when we were talking, you and I were talking about this before, I looked up online the effects of chronic oxidative stress. So having free radical activity in our bodies, there's symptoms and then there's diseases. So I'll start with some of the diseases. Neurological diseases would be like um, Alzheimer's disease, anxiety and depression, ADHD, which I know you want to talk about anxiety and depression in a minute, Asperger's syndrome, autism, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, cardiovascular. In the cardiovascular realm, you have cardiovascular disease, hypertension, angina pectoris, uh, atherosclerosis, and then in the multi-system diseases, you have diabetes, cancer, inflammation. I mean, those are like the three big ones that so many people deal with. uh, fibromyalgia, Lyme disease, chronic fatigue, metabolic syndrome, anxiety, hyperthyroidism, sleep apnea. A lot of people are dealing with sleep apnea these days. And then respiratory, we have COPD, asthma, gastrointestinal disorders from oxidative stress would be Crohn's disease, GERD. A lot of people dealing with GERD and acid reflux. Gastric ulcers, celiac disease, functional dyspepsia, and then with the joints and skin, we have gout, dermatitis, rheumatoid arthritis, carpal tunnel, and there's so many more. There's like it affects your liver, your kidney, like liver disease, kidney failure, skin disorders, cystic fibrosis, arthritis, blood vessel damage, prostate issues, dementia, emphysema. I mean, just so many different realms of disease that have to do with oxidation.
Correct. I just like you, I was stunned when I read these books and these papers on biology, how simple this is, that we all know what an electron is going around an atom. The other thing that surprised me in reading, nobody's ever taken a picture of an electron. The best description of an electron is a mass of energy that looks like a cloud, and it's minutely small, and it goes around the atom, the center of the proton, and it's just like a cloud, and it's full of energy. And scientists do not know where it gets its energy, but it does have energy, and it satisfies the atom so that it's a complete entity. And then as it makes cells, the cells are good and healthy. But if the atom is a free radical, which means it doesn't have an electron, the cell it makes is defective. And over a period of 30 or 40 years of our body begins to deteriorate. And you might notice it from 40s on. And it partly has to do with how much bad things you've done, like smoking and drinking, not eating a good, wholesome diet. Nutrition is vitally important. There's nothing about this that is uh, going to stop bad habits. If you eat bad, you're going to have molecular problem with the electron, and it'll eventually set in to cause you health problems. But if you start out with eating good nutrition and you see that you're beginning to age, if you feed the body right now with supplements that have a lot of electrons, you will stop this and you will live many years beyond.
Hmm. So I just have to stop here to share with you the power of antioxidants. But before I do, it's important to note, as a side note, that antioxidants and electrons are not exactly the same thing, but they kind of are. What happens is an antioxidant will donate an electron to neutralize a free radical. So, it sends out the big guns, and the big guns are the electrons, whenever there's an environmental stressor or aging or some kind of breaking down, the antioxidants will send electrons. So we're just going to kind of use them interchangeably because basically both of them are addressing free radicals and they're working together to do so. But anyway, back to the story. Jim was talking to me before this interview, and he said, Jessica, I just recently had surgery, and you will not believe the doctors told me I was going to have to take these heavy pain meds, but I didn't have to take them because I had almost zero pain. And he said, and also, not only that, but I healed so quickly. And I told him, "Wait, what? I'm sitting here connecting dots." And I told him, "This just happened to my mom like a month and a half ago." So, my mom has been supplementing with this thing called redox molecules, and she's been doing it for like I think she had been doing it for like 6 7 months at that point, maybe 8 months. But anyways, these redox molecules won't give you antioxidants, but they will boost them by a crazy, like astronomical amount, something like 500%. It's amazing. And anyway, you can't get it through it's like one of those multi-level marketing things, so you have to get it through a person. But I had hooked my mom up with it quite a while ago. In fact, most of my family has been taking it. And it was so cool to see because she had back surgery and she had almost zero pain after back surgery, just like Jim. The nurses were pretty amazed. They kept asking her what her pain level was, and she's like, 0, 1, 2, maybe. And she's like, it's not really pain, it's discomfort. And I kid you not, my mom was walking. This is no joke. After back surgery, my mom was walking an hour every morning. My mom has not been able to do that for years without going numb or having pain or something like that. Right after back surgery, I'm talking like a week after back surgery. I mean, she's walking slow during the first week, but after that, she was walking for a full hour, intermittent with a little bit of chair exercises. And each day, she's increasing the amount of laps that she can walk. It was amazing. After 1 month, she goes in for the checkup, and the doctors and nurses are asking her what her pain level is. And she's like, 0? And they can't believe it. And the doctor tells her, this is so funny. The doctor tells her, well, you can walk 10 to 15 minutes a day now. And my mom is like, well, I've been walking for an hour every day pretty much since the surgery. So the doctor, of course, had to kind of convince her not to be such a rock star and let herself heal. But my mom she's determined to get the weight off that she had put on from having difficulty exercising before the back surgery. Anyway, um, it was really incredible. I went to my mom's church and a former nurse came up to me and she goes, I have been nursing for so many years and I have seen so many back surgeries and I have never heard of anyone not taking pain meds after back surgery. She's like, are you kidding me? And then she said, what did you give your mom? Like, what are these redox molecules? You have to tell me about them. She said, and not only that, she's walking an hour a day. What? So it was incredible. And, I picked up this big fat book on the coffee table when I'm talking to Jim about it. And I said, Jim, I just want to show you the power of, I said, I didn't know in the redox molecules, I didn't know what it was that was helping my mom. But now I think it's the fact that it boosts the antioxidants so much. And so I said, look at this book. And I picked up this book. It was a big fat book of testimony after testimony and picture after picture of these people who had problems like back issues they'd had for years, shoulder issues they'd had for years, acid reflux, heart disease, cancer, thyroid, autoimmune, all kinds of things, all kinds of problems that people had had. Some people had had accidents years ago that left them somewhat paralyzed and all this kind of stuff. And I said, these people are seeing miraculous things on these redox molecules. And I said, I just wonder if it really is that it boosts the antioxidants so much. And that might not be the only thing in it, because it really does activate the body's healing powers and in more of a general way. But I said, I think that is a key component. So we just concluded basically the power of antioxidants. And I just had to tell you guys that because it's so powerful. It's so life changing. I mean, people have been able to change their lives on this stuff and recover incredibly quickly with very little pain. So, there's lots of things that health professionals will tell us, oh, it's normal. It's normal to have pain after surgery, or it's normal to have diabetes, or it's normal to have dementia when you get older. There's a lot of things that we're told, but I really wonder if those things are normal, or if we're just depleted from things that could help us avoid all of that. So, I guess just talk to us a little bit about the kind of like what you put together as you were working with farmers and how you were realizing and how all this came together. You had three different components that you mentioned to me besides the ammonium sulfate that really started making changes with what your farmers were seeing. They were seeing an increase in yields. Just explain that process of how you came to understand that changing some things can increase the electrons and what would happen.
Okay, the ability to get electrons from clay turns out to be more difficult than I first realized. But much to my surprise, when I went into business, I had to get a big mixer in a tub so I could put my fertilizer all in that tub and mix it up. I was able to find a gentleman here in Indiana that manufactured equipment for making paint, which this clay is used also in paint. And he used a very high shear mixing blade that shears the clay. Now, what over years I found is that first you've got to tear this clay apart so you have a single shaft of clay, not a bundle of shafts. If you have a single shaft, then the sulfur will neutralize the end of the shaft, which is a positive charge. On the shaft, it's full of electrical charges. And anybody that has ever take a magnet and put it against the nail will notice the entire nail has a charge in it then. Well, you take away that charge on the end of the nail, then the entire nail will lose its charge and it releases the electrons. So my stumbling into buying a plant in the late 70s and early 80s that I could manufacture fertilizer. I'm one that likes to try a lot of options. And so I did a lot of different formulas and making fertilizer. And then during the 80s, when the ammonium sulfate became available at such a ridiculously low price, I started using that. And that's when the farmers started reporting significantly better yields. And it wasn't until I read clear back in 2020, 22, started reading about that I understood why it stimulated plants to yield more crop.
The shearing did?
The shearing, one is first thing you've got to remember, this clay is like a rod, two rods. And when you take it out of the ground, it's dug out of the Okefenokee swamp. It's a different kind of clay. It turns out there's many kinds of clay. I was surprised to learn that.
And farmers typically do use, or fertilizer companies do use clay.
Only this guys that manufacture liquid fertilizer.
Okay, liquid fertilizer.
Yeah, the dry fertilizer, they use the raw chemical of phosphate and potassium and nitrogen to make fertilizer. I was using those, but I had to put clay in because clay is the only one that's rod shaped. All the rest of clay is like two pieces of paper and the electrons lay between them.
But how did you know that you needed to use a rod-shaped clay?
That's the reason they did that. The reason they use this in paint, in a fluid structure, the rod shape forms what is like in a building. When they're building a building, they put the steel structure together and it forms a structure that's like the bones, and it forms that structure, and then it holds all the other parts of the building together. In a fluid structure, like if you're mixing paint or fertilizer, only a part of that is liquid. Part of it is a solid. And you have particles in paint that are solids. And as you all know, you have to go shake it up every month because it will settle. Same thing in fertilizer. You mix fertilizer, some of it's liquid, some of it's dry. In fact, some of the fertilizer mixes I made were 50% solids, but it would settle out if you did not have that rod-shaped clay in there, and that supports the particles so they won't settle. Same thing happens in paint. It's used in a lot of different industries. So this clay is a different kind of clay. It's only found in places like the Okefenokee Swamp, which was deposited millions of years ago by oceans when that was covered by oceans.
So somehow you knew that you needed to use this clay.
I didn't know I needed to use it, except that's when I got it to go to work for Allied Chemical, and they brought out this new system of manufacturing fertilizer, and that they didn't have to dissolve all of the nutrients. They could suspend them, keep them in equilibrium, just like in paint, you keep the solid particles suspended. So at that time, they called this clay a suspension clay. It's suspended particles. And I didn't know a lot about them, except I knew what the particle was. It had an end, it had a positive on each end, and in the middle, it had negative ions. And so that was interesting, but I did, I knew a little about clay, and I knew all clays had the charges. And it wasn't until that in 22, and I started reading about that, I fully understand it. I just knew that it had a mechanical ability to suspend solids so they wouldn't settle out. I did not understand how I could get the electrons off of that clay. I did it accidentally when the government said, get this sulfur out of smokestacks. And us guys that had the ability, we could buy it dirt cheap because the companies were like, what am I going to do with this now that I got it? And they
By
thought,
sulfur dirt cheap
what am I
or
going to?
ammonium?
Ammonium sulfate.
Okay, ammonium sulfate.
Yeah. And they would have it. They got the sulfur out of the smoke, but now what are they going to do with it? And they priced it so cheap that the value of the nitrogen was cheaper, even what you could buy sulfur off the market, but the sulfur off nitrogen on the market, but the sulfur would come along free.
Yes.
And I would give the farmers the sulfur. And so that's how I stumbled into it. And continuing to get experience and seeing farmers getting better yields, I was thrilled, but I just thought it was because I made liquid fertilizer. I did not realize the mechanical and the chemical reaction that was taking place when I mixed clay with ammonium sulfate.
And it was that certain type of clay.
Yeah,
mixed
that's
with
the only kind that works, because all the rest of them are like two pieces of paper, and consequently, the electrons lay between them and you can't get it to release. This clay is like two rods together, and it has a positive charge on the end with the electrons down the shaft. To get that so that the sulfur will react with it, you have to separate those rods, and that's called shearing. You separate the rod individually. And the ground, they're packed together tightly, and just mixing it with water will not do it. You have to shear it. Well, I happened to have a plant that had a 75 horse electric motor and a blade the size of a sawmill blade with teeth on it. And it run extremely fast. And because it went to thousands of feet per second or per minute, that would shear that rod to separate them. And then when the sulfur went in, it would neutralize the end of the positive with this acid of sulfur, releasing the electrons. And every farmer knows that ammonia loves soil electrons. They put ammonia on the ground all the time, and that holds it in the soil. The ammonia goes on the ground at 200 pounds the acre, and it won't volatilize because it chemically bonds to clay soil.
Okay, so basically you used a combination of the clay, which was an adipolgite clay, and then you sheared that clay.
Correct.
And then you added ammonium sulfate, and that was like the magic formula that started producing greater yields within your farmers' crops, right?
Yes, I didn't understand that until the last 4 or 5 years, but at that moment, I started having farmers tell me they got better yields with that. And I didn't understand, other than I was making liquid fertilizer and thinking the fact that it was liquid was doing it. I didn't understand the metabolic value of the adipolgite clay.
Okay, so it was kind of like the clay that made the difference, the switch for you.
That's right. That's why I am struck with the science of metabolic clay and finding that those electrons are so vital to the plant growth, and they are so vital to our own growth, and why we need to eat things that have electrons in them, like the berries and
Mm.
apples. And it wasn't until the last 3 years, as I continued to sit around and read that I was struck by, my gosh, our ground is available and we can grow much healthier food. And that's what I want to tell the people that grow gardens. You can make this up on your home mixer on your countertop. You can shear it with that mixer, and you can put some ammonium sulfate in there. And it only takes about a half a pint per 100 square feet. It's ridiculously small quantity. I mean, it takes like 10 pounds of clay on an acre. I mean, it's just like the dust, and it doesn't take much at all. But it turns out in the molecular world, that clay is full of those electrons. They're extremely small, but they exist. And when you put it on the ground, the plant will take in the nitrogen, which has electrons.
Mm.
And therefore, the plant is full of electrons.
Mm.
Now, we can eat that plant, which is like produce. I went down to the University of Arizona, and Yuma planted lettuce with this clay on it, and
Hmm.
the lettuce heads that had clay lasted twice as long as lettuce with. Lettuce
Oh,
without
wow.
clay only lasts about 3 to 4 weeks after harvest, but lettuce with the electrons on it, it won't oxidize, it won't rot.
So this has big implications for stores actually that are selling produce because their produce can last twice as long.
Yes, it will. It will last twice as long. It is a problem that is hard to tell people this and have them believe it.
Hmm.
They have been producing produce for hundreds of years in those companies, and they can't believe there's something like dirt that's going to come along and make it
Yeah.
possible for their plant to be healthier.
Well, now what they're doing, well, they've been doing various forms of this throughout time, but apeel. Have you heard of apeel?
No,
So a lot of people are kind of up in arms about it because they've a lot of stores have started to coat their fruits and maybe vegetables too with this coating called A peel, and it's supposedly derived from natural sources, but I don't know in the processing how natural it is in the end result. So some people are saying, well, I'm not going to go to this store and buy the produce. So they're coating the fruits and vegetables to make them last longer. We don't know the toxicity of that. And so if there was a way that, you could do it in a healthy way, that's so much better, right? And so what you're saying is, look, the ground already has electrons, but let's amplify those electrons because we need it today. We have so much insult to us with radiation, 5G, EMF frequencies, and the food we eat, and the air we breathe, the water we drink, that it's depleting the electrons and creating free radicals in our body. So you're saying we can put that on the fruits and vegetables that we grow, and we can increase the electrons that our body uptakes when we eat them.
correct. That's the cycle. Is we're getting these electrons from soil, adipogite clay soil. And if we process that, treat it with fertilizer, ammonium sulfate, apply it to the ground, the electrons will be released from the clay and taken up by nitrogen. And when the plant takes in nitrogen,
Mhm.
it gets electrons.
And do you think that if those plants are lasting longer after you pick them, do you think the same effect can happen to us when we eat them, that we actually live longer, just like the plants do?
Yes, to me, there is a very good demonstration of this for the last hundreds of years. Um, people in large parts of the country heard of blue zones, where
Hmm.
people that live well over 100. Well, I did a lot of reading about that. One of the things you noticed is in blue zones, they are in areas that had volcanic eruptions.
Hmm.
And one of the things you look up on the internet is volcanic ash. And you look that up and you discover, my gosh, that is full of electrons.
Hmm.
So the ash has covered the soil. People grow their crops there, and their crops obviously have much higher levels of electrons, and they all live much longer. They
Hmm.
live healthier.
Volcanic soils are some of the most fertile soils in the world. They're very high in nutrients. Several years earlier, I was actually given volcanic ash by a man in Utah to use as a fertilizer for my garden. He sells it to farmers, and the instructions say to put a very small amount. His challenge to me was to put it on half of my garden, observe it, and then take pictures and document the difference between the side of the garden that didn't have volcanic ash and the side that did. He was completely convinced that the side that did have volcanic ash was going to grow faster. It was going to grow bigger and more lush, more fruit on it. So supposedly, it makes plants like volcanic ash makes plants grow like crazy because I got curious and researched a lot more about volcanic ash after this. But yeah, it makes the plants grow like crazy. It makes fruit trees bear tons of fruit. It even had effects on the animals that eat the vegetation, such as better overall health, increased growth, better weight gain, which of course is of interest to farmers who sell their meat. I personally think it's important for grain fed animals because animals that are fed a high level of grains, evidence suggests that they experience inflammation. So that has, of course, negative implications for us when we eat meat that isn't so healthy. You know, what will happen with us and our bodies? Like, will we respond? You know, will it go into our bodies as inflammation as well? But what if the grain, at least, if we're not changing the food that the animals are supposed to eat, for instance, beef are supposed to eat grass, and chickens are supposed to eat um, bugs and things like that. So if that's what they're supposed to eat and they're not given what they're supposed to eat and they're fed grains, at least we could improve the situation perhaps by growing the grains in this volcanic ash, because the volcanic ash will be so high in nutrients that may affect the level of inflammation that they're getting from eating grains, and thus affects our health positively when we eat these animals who are eating, their food grown in this volcanic ash. So basically, I'm just saying, I think that this volcanic ash could improve the health of the meat that we eat. It could improve the health of the plants that we grow and thus improve our own bodies.
Like, for example, Fiji Island, all of that island is volcanic eruptions.
Hmm.
And nobody there ever gets cancer or heart disease. They live very healthy. We just saw in the last few months, there's been eruptions in Italy. They talk about the Mediterranean diet. I'm telling you from the research I have done, the Mediterranean diet is there because people grow crops where there have been volcanic eruptions in that area.
Oh.
Same thing in Greece, same thing in Japan, where that volcanic eruptions have come, and they see the crops do have larger amounts of electrons, and people live healthier longer.
So, do you think it's not really the Mediterranean diet that's so healthy, but rather the fact that they grew it in volcanic soil?
That's my understanding of what I have read. That I have a niece that just graduated from school, and she was into geology,
Hmm.
and she pointed out to me that, because I was talking to her about the clay having electrons, she said volcanoes are full of electrons. And what old Ben Franklin started by wondering how lightning came out of a cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And she pointed out that's exactly how particles, the stones and the particles of a volcanic eruption, get electrons. Just like you go out and walk on the carpet, shuffle your feet, and go over and touch a doorknob, you have a spark. Electrons are formed when particles rub together. And it's whether they be the particles of rain in a cloud or the particles of ash in a volcanic eruption. It all is created by that friction. The good Lord made it possible for us to get that, and He's put it on soils that when you look over history, that's why people live in these areas much longer, much healthier.
Mm.
Uh, People in Japan smoke like a chimney, and they don't get cancer.
Well, it makes me think our, society is constant. There is so much noise around what diet you should eat. And there is like 100 million diets, and people are like, you should try the Mediterranean diet. No, you should try the paleo diet, and there's so much noise. But I'm wondering if it's not so much the diet as the dirt, like what you're putting in the plants.
Right.
Hearing you talk.
That to me, I go back and I think of when my dad talked about how he had to take care of the soil. He had to leave it better
Mm-hmm.
than when he found it. And I'm thinking now here I am at this point in life. That's why to me, I feel I'm obligated to tell people this, that soil, which has these electrons, is the thing that'll help make us healthier. And I'm finding examples of that in the blue zones. In fact, in America, McDonald's and people that want bigger potatoes, they get them of all places from Idaho. Well, you know what blew up out in Idaho? Right next to it was the Yellowstone caldera. And it covered all that ground with those rocks of the caldera, which are high in electrons. And so
Mm.
consequently, when they grow their potatoes in that soil, they grow bigger
They get
potatoes.
big.
I mean, folks, that's not high molecular science. That's just observation.
Hmm.
And the thing that's been thrilling is to go to the University of Arizona and have one of the professors down there sit down and talk to me about this, and we review it and observation. So now I'm working trying to find a lab that will do evaluations of the soil on the electron content. Turns out that's very hard to find.
Hmm.
Now, I have found labs that will do the antioxidant content of the plant I grow. So, right now, I'm trying to focus on growing popcorn and sweet corn and see if that shows more electrons in it and becomes a very healthy food for us.
Yeah.
Popcorn, wow, well, that would be great.
Maybe we can improve the health of some of our junk food.
That's right. Well,
our snacks.
that's absolutely. I have tried to communicate with a lot of these companies that make flour, corn, and wheat flour, and I'm saying I can grow that flour, the corn and wheat, with very high levels of electrons. And when you make flour, that'll become a health food. And that means that junk food, when you eat that Twinkie, it's going to have extra electrons. It'll be healthy for you.
Superfood Twinkie.
I know.
I'm on board.
Well, that's what strikes me. And that's why I'm so passionate about this, that we are on the verge of improving our diets. I think farmers are going to be stunned to know that they are at the focal point of being able to produce healthier food, that the food processors and marketers of produce or flour grains will be much healthier for us. But it starts with the soil, the farmer's farm.
I can relate to a lot of what you were saying because I had a health professional. Well, I do have a health professional friend here in town who is vegetarian, and she used to always have me over to watch health videos and eat good food, right? And one of the videos that she showed me was a documentary on Loma Linda, which is one of the blue zones, if I remember correctly. And I guess there's a high percentage of Seventh day Adventists there, which tend to be the Seventh day Adventists tend to be vegetarian. And so it was following their diet and how healthy they were and how long they were living. And I thought to myself, okay, but that particular place in Loma Linda has really rich soil. And so I was thinking in my mind, like this whole documentary is about the diet and how great the diet is. But I was thinking like, but what about the soil? Because their soil is better than like so many places in the US where we grow our food. So, hearing you talk about that, it really cements in my mind that I really do believe it's not so much about the type of diet you're eating as much as what kind of nutrients are in that food and what are you getting from the soil.
You know, that is exactly where I've come to. I now believe that we are chasing the wrong rabbit and looking at
Mm,
just the nutrition. We've got to look at the complete nutrition. That is the amount of electrons that come into that. And we've got to feed our body with extra electrons because we can't avoid losing some with the lights, the, the food we eat, the smoke we breathe because of like Canadian fires. And so consequently, we need to look at the complete. When I went to Purdue, one of my professors was Earl Butts, became Dean of Agriculture and all that. But he used to have a phrase, sometimes we chase the wrong rabbit. And that's what I believe going on right now with a lot of scientists who are looking at the nutritional value, that not looking at the electron value that will feed us extra electrons. And it's the extra electrons that will neutralize it. People, I write to the USDA and they come back with comments. They're appreciative of my thinking, but they say, well, we don't think we should reduce your body to have no free radicals. You need to have some free radicals. And I'm thinking, why? We need to get a lot. And I'm saying, if you look at blue zones, those people eat produce that floods their body with electrons and they live much healthier, much longer, and they live with a lot of energy.
mm-hmm.
And so I don't have any understanding of when people say that we shouldn't want to get rid of all of them. Well, I don't have a lot of science knowledge. I just have observation, and I'm observing that I don't think having a few free radicals is good for us. We can eliminate those.
I'm not sure if anyone living in the West today, possibly the world, really is having too little free radicals. I mean,
Mm,
like he's saying we need some free radicals, but I think most people have way too much.
bingo.
So I think that's the big problem. Now, when you said electrons, I had no frame of reference of what you were talking. I thought it was some scientific term to me, and I didn't know what it had to do with health years ago when you first started. You were
Mhm.
first passionate about it, but I had heard it in one regard, and that is with grounding or earthing. And that's something that's becoming very popular now. But basically, the idea of that is that you go walk barefoot on the ground, and the EMF frequencies, the 5G, the radiation, the electrical currents from your home, and things like that that are coming into your body, Wi-Fi, those things can be released into the ground, I guess, and you can uptake electrons so that the free radicals that all the radiation and all of that created can now balance out from the electrons from the ground.
Yes, you and I are on the same page because the fact that I'm getting those electrons into food that we eat, or you walk on the ground. I've run into guys that play golf barefooted because they want to get earthy and they walk on the golf course.
Oh,
It's nice, clean, grassy soil, and they walk barefooted on the soil. So they understand earthing, they understand the need for it. And I'm saying we're all doing the same thing. I'm
mm-hmm.
telling you, you can grow healthier food that is
Hmm.
going to put those electrons in your body, or you can go walk on bare feet on the ground.
There was a documentary that first I first started understanding about grounding. I'll see if I can put it in the comments of the video. But it was a video about this guy who, I guess he was, if I remember correctly, he was maybe sick. He had health issues, and he started just sleeping on the ground outside, and he started getting these miraculous results. And so he realized that it was at the actual ground, and he tried to figure out, like, how could people, because people, he's like, I want to get people well. I want to share this with people, but how do they just, they're not going to sleep on the ground all the time. They're
Yeah.
going to sleep in a comfy bed inside. So he's like, how do I get the grounding effects inside? So that's the documentary follows his journey, how he realized if he gets a copper rod and hooks it up with different wiring or whatever, sticks it in the ground, he can then wire it into the house where they're sleeping, and they can sleep on it. So what he did was he took this whole package deal, the copper rod and the wiring, put it in a paper bag, and handed it out to all the people in his neighborhood that had illnesses, were in wheelchairs, and so forth. And it was amazing because his whole neighborhood started healing because they were grounding themselves every night while they were sleeping.
Yes, that to me is just plain observation that the average person can understand, and they can document it with their own life. In the last 5 years, I have moved to taking a lot more supplements.
Mm-hmm.
I take a broad spectrum of supplements with all the major vitamins and so forth. Then I add to it one called resveratrol, which is grape seed extract.
Mm-hmm.
And then I add another one called astaxanthin, which is the same thing. It has 6,000 times more electrons than even vitamin C. So I've
When you say
tried to,
electrons, do you mean
yeah,
antioxidants? Okay.
antioxidants or electrons, yeah. And so antioxidation or electrons, the words mean the same thing. Antioxidation. A thing that is antioxidant is an electron. So when you say antioxidant, you're talking about a product that is stopping oxidation, and that's an electron.
Hmm. Didn't you say something about how lemon juice can stop
Yes,
oxidation?
um, people have done that before. Uh, like an apple will start rotting right away before you even get the whole thing to eat. But if you spray on a very thin layer of lemon juice, it's got electrons in it, which will stop oxidation.
So the browning is the oxidation.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, just like everything oxidized, metal. Uh, Anybody in areas that have snow and get salt on their car, they'll see them rust out in 10 years. And that's all that is just plain good old oxidation.
So where can we get these antioxidants or electrons? You mentioned berries, and we've mentioned earthing and grounding. In other words, walking barefoot. Where else can we
There's a
get
lot of
this from?
foods, and what I am advocating, people that grow produce, gardens,
Mm-hmm.
they can make this up in their home. You can buy 10 pounds of this clay, and
And what was the clay called again?
it's called Attapulgite clay,
Okay.
Attapulgite, Attapulgite clay. And it's a rod shape, the only one that's rod shape. And then to make a formula for your home, you would put in uh, 32 ounces of liquid. Then you would put in on that uh, 10 ounces of aluminum sulfate and 2 ounces of clay. It doesn't take much. You're always thinking, gee, only just a little bit of clay, but that does the trick. And so you got this quart you made up, and that'll do several hundred square feet. And like I say, half a pint will do 100 square feet. Or if you're doing the flour in your home, you just need to use a spoonful and put it on the soil. Maybe give it a little water on it to soak it down. But it's just that easy. It
How
doesn't take
often do you
much.
put it down?
Oh, once or twice a year. You don't have
Oh,
to do it
okay.
very often. Just a
Okay.
couple times.
Is there a certain time of year? Like, is it before you put the seeds in your garden?
Well, you want to put it on the soil. You
Okay.
don't want it to touch the plant. It'll
Okay.
because it's highly acid solution
Mm.
with the sulfuric acid in it. You don't want it to touch the solution, but put it on the ground, the sulfur will be absorbed into the soil quickly. So it does a lot of good for you.
And do you just mix all three of them together in a bowl, or how do you?
Well, I mix it in a typical countertop mixer. Like I
A
say, I
blender.
start out blender
Okay.
with 32 ounces of water, and then I put in about 10 ounces of ammonium sulfate and about 2 ounces of clay.
And where can they get the
But you go
adipolgite
on,
clay?
if you go on the internet, put in Adipolgite clay, there are several people that market it. One of them is a company out of Omaha. They get it shipped in by the carload and they send it out by the ton. But you can buy, I talked to them the other day, they can put together a 10-pound can of it and
Hmm.
you can buy that. That 10 pounds will last you a long time.
Hmm. Okay. And you also mentioned volcanic ash. That also has
Right,
heavy electrons on it as well.
right.
But you can just basically take the adipolgite clay, ammonium sulfate, shear it in the blender, and spray it before you plant your seeds every year. And that's it. It's a
Yeah,
very simple way to just get a higher yield and fruits and vegetables that will last longer in the fridge
great.
and that will create an anti-aging may create an anti-aging effect within the body just as it's doing in the plants.
Yeah, yeah. The simplicity of it is one of the things that really surprises me, and that's why a lot of people, farmers and fertilizers, well, you're only talking about 10 pounds of clay on an acre, and that's like dust you're throwing around, and they can't believe that would have any value.
Mm.
But in 40 years of uses, since 1980s, every time that I've applied this to the ground with the mix I've just mentioned, it has always produced increased crop yields. And I'm sure if you scientifically evaluate the antioxidants, it would show higher antioxidants. Um, that's why University of Arizona said, I got to get some science now on this
Mm.
and have the labs check it out and see how much antioxidants. Right now, another thing that puzzles me, and I haven't been able to figure it out. You're right. Of all the things that have antioxidants in right now, our fruits have much higher level of antioxidants than anything else. Berries, particular, and apples. Most every fruit is higher. And people that eat fruit after their dinner, very good. Selection is superior, superb. To have that way, you don't have to buy a supplement. You're getting it naturally. And so
Mm.
that's a great way. A lot of drinks now that they show will have high antioxidants. Good source. Uh, any way you can get antioxidants, anything that promotes that, you can do.
I think I looked it up and I saw, because I always thought it was berries that were the main, and berries are high in antioxidants, but also chocolate and olive
Yeah,
oil.
dark chocolate. I love dark chocolate. I've been able to wean myself from milk chocolate to dark chocolate. I love that. Every
Oh,
night I have
yeah.
a little piece of a chocolate bar.
Yeah, it's so good. And so it's something that's tasty, but you can also get nutrients. So chocolate, I think it was olive oil, avocado oil, almonds and walnuts.
Right. Seeds.
Uh-huh.
It's very good.
So
Yeah.
it's a very like wide range of um, food that you can eat that's high in antioxidants, and I think that that should be encouraging for people because the more you're eating natural foods that have not been processed, you're doing so much good for your body and creating anti-aging effects. If you want to just like amplify that like crazy, you can do things to the soil, grow your own food. And I told you before, Sharona, my husband, he and his team, because he's in agriculture as well, and him and his team went and measured the nutrients of fruits and vegetables from different stores, different grocery stores. And I won't say which grocery stores they checked because I probably would get in trouble for it, but they did test some grocery stores for their produce and found almost zero in the nutrients, almost zero. And but on the other hand, they went to farmers markets, people growing fruits and vegetables locally in, their backyards, and the nutrient quality was way higher, way, way higher. And so I'm so glad that you're talking about this today because I really want to encourage people to grow their own foods in their backyard. And what you're telling them today is, look, you can take those foods, which already are going to be higher in nutrients than anything likely that could be bought in the stores, but you can take that and you can increase the electrons, increase the antioxidants, and ground yourself through what you're eating, not just from walking barefoot.
That's right. To me, the more I've studied it, the more I just find it. It's so simple. What we need to do is teach people how they can do it, and it doesn't require a lot of money. In fact, for farmers, $15 an acre will return $100 an acre more corn. I mean, I can't believe it,
Mm,
how advantageous that is.
wow.
And the public doesn't have to buy a supplement. They can just eat products that have been grown with antioxidants.
Yes, right. Yeah, you wouldn't have to supplement as
No.
much. But I remember you telling me that when you did supplement, you increased your antioxidants in the body, the electrons. When you supplemented, you said you did not have that afternoon slump anymore where you were tired.
Yes, I'm very fortunate in my life. I drive a motorhome, and a lot of times I'll eat a cookie or something for lunch because we're wanting to drive a long distance. And then I noticed when I eat an apple, I don't get near as tired. If I eat a cookies or two, by the middle of the afternoon, I'm drowsy. And I found out that the apples contain a lot of antioxidants, and consequently, they stop that drowsy period you get after you've had lunch.
Mm,
Particularly if you have lunch with ice cream or cake and you
mm-hmm,
have that sugary material, and that just crushes you 3 or 4 hours later.
mm. Jim, can you tell us how you started getting interested in electrons and knowing that they were important?
Well, first, from my education at Purdue, I knew enough about soil to know that the clay has electrons in it. So that's the background of my fundamental understanding, but I didn't know what they did beyond the fact they existed. And then in my years with Allied Chemical, I stumbled into this benefit I was getting out of clay, putting it on the soil, and seeing farmers get better yields. Well, it took me then a few more years to finally get enough courage to start reading biology. And quite frankly, I wouldn't have done that. It would have been for the pandemic.
The
We in Vegas.
pandemic made scholars out of all of us.
Yeah, yeah. I couldn't go to the casino and the restaurants. Everything's closed, and you sit home and you think, "What are you going to do?" And one day, in my computer, I just put in electrons in plants, and I was so surprised to see there was tremendous amount of articles in there, and so I started reading them, and that's how bored I was. But anyways, the more I read, the more I realized, my gosh, that really does work. And that stimulates that electron is energy. In fact, every time a electrician goes out and hooks up a wire and he turns the electricity on, he says, I energize the wire. That is
Mm,
exactly what we do to our body. The electron energizes our body. It, to me, it's not highfalutin science. It's just plain English. That's what the electrician does. He energizes the wire. We eat electrons in our food, and that energizes our body. And then in the 2020, I bought this book, We Are Electric. And that book there goes back to Ben Franklin and his understanding of what lightning is, electrons coming out of clouds, and it goes traces that 300, 250 year history of where we are today, and how doctors over the years found out when they put electrons on muscles in frogs, they would jump. And it's very interesting to hear all that and read that. And then you get to the latter part of the book, and it points out this transcends drugs. The elegance of this new mechanism. You don't have to mess with drugs and side effects. You just put the electrons in the body, and the body will know what to do with them. You will have more energy, you will be healthier, and it will defeat a lot of chronic diseases.
Hmm.
Then I read another book, which we're going to talk about chronic diseases. Another lady wrote a book called We Are Electric, Lynette Hill. And she talks about being in the hospital with stage 4 cancer, couldn't walk, and had all the chemotherapy she could stand, and told him forget that. She was going home, and she was going to start on a regimen of antioxidants. And she lists the three of them in the book. And in 1 month, she was able to get, she took them very religiously several times a day. She was able to get up and walk. In 4 months, she was able to drive a car. And in 1 year, after having stage 4 cancer, she was declared cancer free. And so I have always been impressed how much we can learn at this point in life with tremendous amount of knowledge that permeates our world. We don't have to go any place to get it. It comes to us right in our home. It's free, and it's written so you can understand it. You can't understand all the terms, but you know enough about reading that you understand what the significance of having electrons are and stopping oxidation. Antioxidant, stop oxidation, and you stop it with electrons.
Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing this, Jim, and telling people what they can do practically at home
Yeah.
to increase their health. It's really awesome what you found.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I just want to share this information for the benefit of everybody. The good Lord put it all there. It's just for us to figure it out and take advantage of it. We can live another 100 years.
Yes, God willing.
Thank you.